Kennedy, do solemnly swear
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear
that you will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of your ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Okay, it's time for another episode of Reading the Constitution. Today is Saturday, April 6, 2019. This is Article 2, Section 1, and today is about the executive branch, the President of the United States. Now, the opening clip you saw there was the inauguration of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy in 1961. He was elected in 1960. So we're going to learn all about how the President gets elected here in this episode. So remember, when we left off the last time, we were working on, we just finished up Article 1, the legislative branch of the Constitution, and that completed everything in the Constitution, all the articles in the original Constitution, everything except part of Section 1, a few of the clauses in Section 1 we have not looked at. And Section 2, excuse me, is Section 1, Article 2. So that's what we're going to do today. So let's just take a look at Article 2, Section 1. Here's a little overview of what it is. There's 4 clauses in it. In fact, let's look at the original Constitution. If you look here, there's the first page. Second page, there's Article 2 at the bottom. So there's Section 1 starts right there at the bottom. And continues on in the top part of this third page here. And if I look at this other picture of the Constitution, I think this is it here. This is, there's Article 2, starts at the bottom there with Section 1. There's one line, or one clause, and it continues on here to Section 2 and Section 3. So, anyway, let's just take a look at this, a little overview of this. And so we're going to cover Section 1 today. We've already covered Section 2, 3, and 4, but we'll just touch on what they're about. So Section 1 essentially establishes the presidency and the vice president. It talks about the electors, how to choose the president, talks about the eligibility for the office of president. It talks about presidential succession, compensation, and the oath of office. There's a total of 8 clauses in Section 1, so that's what we're going to do today. Section 2 has to do with the powers of the president, and there are 3 clauses for that. We've already done that. Section 3 is the duties of the president. There's 7 clauses in that. We've already done that. And Section 4 has to do with removal from office, and there's 2 clauses for that. And we've already completed that. So all we have to do is Section 1 here. So let's just move on here. Just do the very first, here it is. This is the overview of Section 1, the 8 clauses. And I'll just give an overview of what those are. Clause 1.1 just establishes there's a president, vice president, and there's a term of 4 years. Clause 1.2 talks about the states appointing electors, talks about the number of electors, and what makes a person ineligible to be an elector. Section 1.3, that's Clause 1.3, this has to do with choosing the president. And by the way, this has been replaced since the original Constitution was written by Amendment XII. And Clause 1.4 has to do with the time of choosing electors. Clause 1.5 has to do with the eligibility for president, and there's 3 requirements. Clause 1.6 has to do with the presidential succession. And again, this has been modified by Amendment 25 in 1967. Clause 1.7 has to do with the president's compensation. And number 8 is the oath of office, which we just heard in that clip at the beginning. So let's just start with the very first 1.1. And again, we already looked at this before, but we'll just read it here for completeness. It says, the executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during a term of 4 years together with the vice president chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. So this basically says that all the executive powers in the president, and he has a 4-year term, and then the next, it gives a colon, which means that what follows is going to be how he's elected. So let's go to section 1.2. And this is a really long one here. This, in fact, is so long I broke it up into well, this isn't a long one. This is an easy one. 1.2 says, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress. But no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. So there's two things there I just read. One says that the state appoints the electors, and that basically in any way that the legislature may direct. And then it determines the number of electors, and that number is equal to the number of senators plus the number of representatives. And remember, there's 2 senators from each state, and the number of representatives depends on the population determined by the census taken in each state. So you basically add the number of senators and the number of representatives for a given state. That tells you how many electors you'll have. And the rest of it there, the last part says, basically declares certain people ineligible to be an elector. You can't be a senator or representative, or you can't hold an office in the United States. Okay, here's where it gets to be complicated. The next part here talks about the actual process of choosing the president, and it's pretty long, and also it's been changed with another amendment, but there's basically a couple of different parts to it. And the first part is like once you've selected your electors, then what happens is the electors the first part is the electors will cast their ballots, and then the second part is the ballots are counted by the Senate. So I'll read the first part here, and I call it clause 1.3a, but it's really just one big clause, but we had to break it up to make it a little simpler to understand. So here's what it says. The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for 2 persons, one of whom at least shall not lie an inhabitant of the same state with themselves. And they shall make a list of all the persons voted for and the number of votes for each, which list they shall sign and certify, and transmit sealed to the seat of government of the United States, directed to the President of the Senate. So this basically says that the people who are chosen to be electors, and I'll just go back to here. Remember, this one talked about appointing electors, and said that they can determine how to choose electors. And so all the electors have to get together, and they all vote by ballot, and each one votes for 2 people, and then they make a list of all the people that were voted for, and they send it to the seat of government and send it to the President of the Senate. And remember, that's going to be after a while, it's going to be the vice president, the sitting vice president. So that's the first part, is all the electors vote and then send their ballots off to the President of the Senate. The next part here, I'm calling it 1.3b, is the next step, and I'll read that. It says, the President of the Senate shall, and the President of the Senate and House of Representatives open all the certificates, and the votes shall be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes shall be the President, if such number may be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed. So this says that basically the President of the Senate is the guy who counts the votes. He's got to do it in front of everybody, all the presidents of the Senate and House of Representatives, to make sure he's not stuffing the ballot. So he opens all the certificates with all the votes in it from the electors, and he counts them. And if the person with the greatest number of votes, the majority, he'll be the president. And as long as there's a majority. Now, what if there's not a majority? Well, what if there's more than one person has a majority? Remember, this like each elector can vote for 2 people. So it says, the next part says, and if there be more than one who has such majority and have an equal number of votes, then the House of Representatives shall immediately choose by ballot one of them for president. So if there's a tie, basically it goes to the House of Representatives to choose the president. And continuing on is, what if no one has a majority? It says, and if no person have a majority, then from the 5 highest on the list, the said House shall in like manner choose the president. So if there's a lot of people get votes and no one got a majority, the House will choose a president from the 5 highest on the list. And again, this has actually been modified in 1804, there was this big problem in the election of 1800, and so they decided to change it. But we'll talk about that when we get to the Amendment 12. Okay, but there's even more to this here, this clause. It continues on here, and this part gets really complicated. It says, but in choosing the president, the votes shall be taken by states, the representation from each state having one vote. So I'm not sure why they have to make that statement. A quorum for this purpose shall consist of a member or members from 2/3 of the states, and the majority of all the states shall be necessary to a choice. So this just talks about, I guess, to be valid, you have to have a majority of the states have to be present. And continuing on, it says, in every case, after the choice of the president, the person having the greatest number of votes of the electors shall be the vice president. But if there should remain 2 or more who have equal votes, the Senate shall choose from them by ballot the vice president. And this part here, in fact, I'm going to change this. I'm going to just expand it out a little bit here, because this is the last part here is actually has to do with choosing a vice president. And it says that when you choose a vice president, he's the guy who has the second number of votes. And it turns out there's 2 people have the same tied for second, then the Senate chooses. So that's a whole really complicated, long-winded thing. But it turns out that this has all been replaced by Amendment 12. So it's interesting how it worked back then, but it works a little differently now. So we'll get to that when we get to the amendments. Okay, let's move on and just we'll just complete the rest of the clauses here in Section 1. So Section 1.4 has to do with the time of choosing electors. It says the Congress may determine the time of choosing the electors and day on which they shall be given their votes, which day shall be the same throughout the United States. So this basically says Congress can choose the date when the electors will be selected. And remember, the electors were selected back in the states, and I think nowadays we call this like the day that there's a general election day. It's kind of when you choose the electors. So anyway, let's continue on here. Article 2, Section 1.5. This has to do with eligibility for president, and there's 3 requirements. And by the way, we already talked about this before, but we'll just continue and do it anyway. It says no person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible to the office of president. Neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained to the age of 35 years and been 14 years a resident within the United States. So there's the 3 requirements. He has to be a natural-born citizen. He has to be 35 years old. He has to be a resident for 14 years. Now, of course, when they were first voting for the first president, nobody around at that time who was eligible, who was 35 years old, was a citizen of the United States when they were born, because there was no United States. They were born, like, say, Washington was born like in 1732. That was long before there was the United States of America. So they have this clause there. It says, the subclause says, or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution. So that would have been 87, 88, 89 when it was expected to be adopted. So if you're a citizen then, you were eligible. That's what made George Washington eligible. And the other part here says a natural-born citizen. That means you have to be born on the soil. And there's a law called the Law of Soil that says that kind of determines if you're a citizen or not. And that was what the original, to be a president, you have to be a citizen who was born on the soil. Okay, let's continue on here. Section 1.6. This has to do with presidential succession. And again, this is if he's impeached. Close this. There's a warning there. In case of the removal of the president from office or of his death, resignation, or inability to discharge the powers and duties of the said office, the same shall devolve on the vice president, and the Congress by law provide for the case of removal, death, resignation, or inability, both of the president and vice president, declaring what officer shall then act as president, and such officer shall act accordingly until disability be removed or a president shall be elected. So this is the original way it was done. is if the president couldn't serve, he was removed. If he died, if he resigned, if he was incapacitated and he couldn't do the duties of the president, it then went to the vice president, became the president. And after that, it was determined by Congress was able to make a law who would be the next in line. And again, they replaced this with the Amendment 25 in 1967. I believe, now the third in line is going to be the Speaker of the House of Representatives. But we'll get to that when we look at the amendments. Okay, let's go to section 1.7. This has to do with the president's compensation. It says the president shall, at stated times, receive for his services a compensation which shall neither be increased nor diminished during the period for which he shall have been elected. So this says he receives compensation, and they can't raise it or lower it. So if you think about that, they don't want them raising or lowering his pay. If they don't like what he's doing, they might try to cut his pay, and or if they want to bribe him, they would just increase your pay. Well, they can't do that, so he can't change his pay while he's president. Continuing on, he says, and he shall not receive within that period any emolument from the United States or any of them. And remember we talked about emolument, basically meant some kind of consideration or something of value. It could either be a paycheck or money or pay, or it could also be an award, or it could be, almost anything that has value. So we can't get anything like that. Okay, this is the last clause here. Section 1.8, Oath of Office. And again, we did that. We went through this before, and also the opening clip shows President John Fitzgerald Kennedy taking the oath of office when he was sworn in. And the key point here is that you have to take an oath or affirmation. So he says, before he enter on the execution of his office, he'll take the following oath or affirmation. So he's not the president until he's sworn in. And he has to say the following words. I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So this is like a huge oath. Remember we talked about the holy words shall be obeyed, and this is where the president swears that he will obey the holy words of the Constitution, and he will faithfully execute the office of president and to the best of his ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So they have to, whatever's in the Constitution, the supreme law of the land, they are required to uphold it, protect it, defend it. That is the law. Okay, so it's basically, that's Article 2, Section 1. So let's just go back here and take a look at this here. So we got Article 2, Section 1. We've already done the other sections. And if I go back here to the very top level of the Constitution, we have now covered every article in the original Constitution, the preamble and all the signatories and the attest by the Secretary. The only thing we haven't done yet is the amendments, which is the Bill of Rights, and then the additional amendments. So we'll do that in a future episode.